Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jody Hammer, Career Services Specialist with the National Peace Corps Association. And I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about the virtual interview. We've done some sessions in the past on regular interviewing, and this is really aimed at our reality today with virtual interviewing being what we're doing with COVID, of course. So we'll go through, and it's very popular besides that, which you'll hear about as well. So it's something that's definitely here to stay. It's a trend that's really growing. And so it's important to know how to, how to prepare, how to interact with a computer versus a person. There's a lot of differences there. So let's go ahead and get started here. And we always, at the beginning, we just do a very quick overview. Global Reentry is one of the newer programs of the NPCA, National Peace Corps Association, which is really designed to help the evacuees and RPCVs with their career transitional service, which is kind of the first pillar. That's the one that I work in a lot, but also with education, connecting RPCVs to opportunities that exist and the well-being and continued service. So there's definitely, those are the four pillars, and I'm going to leave it at that because I think we definitely have covered that. And my camera is working, so this is good for a change. We've been having some technical difficulties with my camera, so forgive me if it does go out in the middle, but I will try to keep it on so that I can see you. And I encourage any of you who are comfortable to make yourself live as well, if you will, and it's as much of a conversation as possible. So great. We're going to talk about the virtual interview, as I said, and it's quite different than your traditional interview in many ways, but it's very similar in other ways. So it's really, as I said, it's a booming trend, and that goes back far beyond the start of COVID, right? If we can remember that far back, right? It has been gaining steam in recent years for a variety of reasons. For the employers, it's easier sometimes, and for really the interviewee, easier to carve out a set period of time, and it's just that amount of time you need. You don't need to factor in going into the city and finding parking and all of those kinds of things. So it's more convenient oftentimes for both. It's less expensive for both. In many ways as well. And so there's lots of reasons why it's becoming so popular. And one of the stats that I found, 66% of employers prefer video interviews over in person because of those reasons that I've shared, right, and others. So there's lots of benefits to it, and it's really important that we do, become accustomed to video interviewing and what it is and how to excel at it. I'm curious in asking the folks that are here, how many of you prefer a video interview versus an in-person? If you can just you can either click on your, the up side, the thumbs up sign on your picture, that's fine, or just drop in the chat box yes. So I'm wondering how many prefer a virtual interview over an in-person. Let's see here. All right, looks like we have, all right, so definitely some, but no, not, it's definitely more prefer the in-person. And my follow-up question would be, why do you prefer the in-person one over the virtual? So just drop your response in the chat box, and I'm going to open up that as well. So I have it, and I know Bethany is on standby here. She's so great helping back up this, and maybe Bethany, you can kind of take a perusal of the chat box and tell me what folks are saying. It's hard to have all that open when you're doing the presentation. All right, did anyone comment in there? I'm not certain which. Okay, so some people are not certain which they prefer, and that's okay. And Marta, great comment. I like meeting new people. You're like me. I much prefer in-person connection whenever possible, right? So, but there are benefits of each and such. So, great. Oh, and Marta, thank you so much for the kind words there. That's very, very kind. Wonderful. So you may prefer one or the other, but, or I like to say, and you want to be prepared for either. So, and skilled in either. So we're gonna talk a little more about that. So let's keep going here. So first of all, we need to back up and say, congratulations, you've gotten the interview. So, let's say you applied for a job and it was one of the jobs you're most interested in, and you just got the response saying, we'd like to interview you. So that's awesome, right? And then it becomes oh, now what? So it's that preparation for the interview, right? So in this case, we're going to assume you have a video interview as we talk through a lot of the things. However, there are a lot of similarities, right? So all the standard prep that we talk about in the regular interviewing process, things like researching the organization, right? Coming up with some intelligent questions that show the employer, the hiring official, that you've done your homework. All of those kinds of things, right? Reviewing the job description. I cannot emphasize that enough. And this is true. All of these things I'm going through right here are true, whether it's in-person prep or prep for an in-person or prep for a virtual, right? So knowing that job description, the requirements, those keywords they're using that you can then put into your answers, right? You need to practice your responses too to some of the common requests and common, questions that are out there, and incorporate those skills that they're most looking for, right? So there's definitely an art to interviewing, and it's something I strongly believe anyone can do. It's just that preparation, taking the time that it takes to actually go back and review the job description, plus your resume. Because let's face it, we tailor our resume to each of the jobs. That's what I preach. I talk about that all the time, right? So you want to make sure that you're going to go into that interview and you're going to be talking about your skill set and your experience in a consistent way to that which you put yourself out there to them in the application. So it doesn't come across as, well, they kind of sounded like this, but this made them sound. So you want to be really genuine and, and real about what your experience is and have it match. Also, developing, like I said, the stories, right, that you can use for your, your interview, right? And those are, again, the same, right? The types of stories that are going to show, how you handle an issue, what you did, so you want to think of it kind of in that, I talk about the STAR methodology or SCAR, where you have that, you discuss very briefly the situation, right, and the context, and then the action that you took, and the results. That the outcomes are so important, and especially when you're interviewing, but also in your resume as a side point. So all of those things, you want to make sure that you're up to speed on all of that. But there are a lot of additional things to think about with a virtual, right? First of all, what to wear, right? Now, a lot of us have gotten very used to, perhaps too used to, being more casual at home when we're working in our home environment. And I would say particularly from the bottom down, right? Because even if we're on Zoom, we're, many people, you are wearing something that looks fine up top, and you might have your shorts on the bottom, or your pajamas, in this case, your boxers, whatever, right? I don't know if anyone noticed here, but in the little graphic that I have, if you look at the bottom, you see that this person didn't wear the entire, they're just in that half. And I would strongly encourage you to dress professionally. And the reason for that is it makes you feel more professional. Even you kind of dress the role. I've talked to some friends, and I talked to somebody who said they put on their shoes, like their work shoes, in the morning before they go into their space, where their office is, because that to them makes them feel they're at work. They're, so they're completely, dressed for the part as well. So you can certainly get away with the PJs on the bottom when you're doing your day-to-day, job type of things. But for the interview, I would strongly encourage you to put on the PJ bottoms. Not to mention, what if, unlikely, but what if they, ask you to stand up and give a presentation, on the fly, some kind of, what would you say? And, you really don't want to be in a situation where that would come out. I don't know if any of you saw, in these COVID times, there's so many funny, examples, right? But there was I think it was in a BBC interview, I believe, and the reporter who was on screen, who was being interviewed, didn't realize that they would be seen like further down. So he was totally dressed professionally on the top part, and he had like these little, like, basically, I think they were a boxer type of, you could see just a little of his, his upper leg, and it was like, oh my gosh, that was all the rage on, of course, online and stuff, the humor and whatnot. So just make sure that you are dressed professionally. I always say, even if you're interviewing for an organization that's super casual, I would probably go a step above their typical dress code. Nobody's going to, judge you negatively for being more professionally dressed. They may, if you're not very professionally dressed. So like I always say to people, even if you're going in on Friday and it's this company has a casual Friday, policy, I would still dress professionally. So great. Wonderful. And then, you can choose, on a screen, it's hard to connect, right? And we're going to talk a little more about that. But one of the things that you can do, you want to make sure that your dress is not distracting. So, you don't want anything that has just too much pattern going on, especially if you have some kind of pattern in your background. You just want to be sensitive to that. Your a little bit of color or pop, maybe a scarf, for example. I like to say a scarf would be an opportunity for you to pop. It just brings a little additional color and that kind of thing. Or maybe a nice little bit, a tie for a man, right? That is, you wouldn't want it to be too gaudy, but something that's kind of interesting that might, help set you apart. So those kinds of things are fine. But what you really want to be careful about are the distractions. So like jiggly or large jewelry, right? Especially the ones that make sound when you move, that can be really distracting. As well as, sometimes the, really bright or jeweled nails or whatever, especially if you use your hands to talk. Which you should probably use your hands less in a video interview, by the way, than you do. I am a huge hands talker. So when I'm even giving presentations, I walk, I, move my hands a great deal. So it's really hard for me. It's almost like I have to sit on my hands, if I'm doing a video interview, but that's, worth it because it's distracting. It can't be distracting. So, so that's a little bit about, what to wear. A lot of those, coincide with, it's the same for the virtual or the in-person, but definitely keep those things in mind. Okay, so let's talk more about video interview tips. So it's, you want a private setting, right? If you're in your home, you're in your office, lock the door, whatever, where you can't be interrupted. That's really the key, right? Keep the pets in another room. How many of you can attest to, while it's cute in some ways, the dog coming up and jumping in your staff meeting on you, it's a different thing when you're in an actual interview, in a professional interview. You don't want any kind of distractions like that, okay? You want a clean background, minimalist, a blank wall is fine. You can add a little to it to give a little, pop, but again, it's that just so that it's fairly clean. You don't want it just to be your background if you have lots of, papers stacked up or, messy clutter, you really don't want to give that perception. So you want to make sure that you can be somewhere where it's, fairly clean and organized. Okay. Maintaining eye contact, and this is very key. Now, here's the hard part. With the video interview, right? And you've probably discovered this when you're even talking to friends and family using Zoom and whatnot. If you're looking at them on the screen, you're not looking at the camera, right? You are not giving them eye contact. So sometimes people will say, put the little bar with the people right up underneath the camera so that you're at least looking close there. But really try to have your emphasis be on the camera, because that's going to give you the best eye contact perception, right? And it's hard because you're looking at this little dot, right? So sometimes I'll even, I used to put a little sticky next to my camera, and I would say, a smiley face. And part of that was because I tend to be, when I'm doing, workshops and things, I tend to be pretty intense in a way, right? And so that doesn't really translate very well on a virtual, video type of thing where, you need to smile a little bit more when you're in a video interview, smiling with your eyes as well as what you're saying and your tone, making sure that you're really, using a good energetic type of tone, right? Even leaning in a little bit is, it's that body language, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But it gives that perception of being interested, right? You don't want to be playing with your hair or, biting your, whatever, your nails or, picking at them. You want to really make sure that you don't do any of that, right? But you also do want to prepare for the possible, tech issues. And so practice, I can't emphasize that enough. You want to practice and make sure that you know how to use the technology. Practice with a friend of yours, or just get on screen so they can see what your video looks like, what your lighting looks like, right? Because we talk a lot about that as well, right? Your lighting, and they actually say backlighting generally doesn't work well with a camera, right? From a laptop. So you want more of that light in front of you, or ideally be closer to a window. I know that's not possible for all of us. I know, especially in COVID times where you may have more than one, person, partner that's home working, right? So you may be like me in my little basement pseudo cardboard cubicle type of setup where it doesn't lend itself as much to being close to a window, unfortunately. So but definitely think about that as well. Okay. So I want to know if there's any questions so far that are coming up. Bethany, do you see any in the chat box? And I just want to remind folks, if you do have any questions, dump them in and we'll answer them either now or in a little bit. I've left plenty of time for questions. Okay.
No questions yet. So if anybody has.
Okay, no problem. That sounds good. All right, so let's talk about how communication is conveyed, right? Because only a very small percentage uh, of what the communication, how it's conveyed, is actually verbal, is what you say, right? So we spend all this time worried about how do we make the best, connection with them? What do we say? How do we answer this question, that question, all of that, right? What do I say? And that emphasis is on how do I answer that in the right way that I'll get hired? When in reality, although that is very important, it really is interesting that up to 93% of communication is nonverbal. Okay, so that means your body language more, right? 93%. So only 7% is verbal. That's a pretty small percentage, right? And so sometimes, I think I talk to clients and they say, I had this interview and I'm not sure, I could have said this better. I don't think I did. And then they end up getting an offer and they're like, wow, I can't believe I got that offer. Well, think about it. Part of it is what you say, but so much more is, right, is things like this. The human face, your connection, your interest, enthusiasm, right? 55%. Wow. 38% tone. How you say things, right? So you really want to focus on your tone and how you respond to questions. It's very easy to go into monotone, especially if you've tried really hard to rehearse the answers. I am not somebody who believes in memorizing the answers to those common questions. So when they ask me the weakness question, I'm going to say, and I've memorized it. The reason I'm not a fan of that is because generally it comes out as less authentic. Because when you're doing that, when you're you're spitting out that answer, it's going to likely be more monotone. It's not going to be as conversational, off the cuff. You want things to come out as if you are just saying it for the first time and to them. So pay special attention to your tone and having a very friendly, professional, interested type of aura, right? That's super important. Great. All right. And Dan, thank you for giving some good good thoughts on, what kind of interview it is and who you'll be talking to. Absolutely. Yeah, and screening interviews, I should mention that because I don't really have anything on that in this presentation, but you're right. Screening interviews, they're super popular, and the reason they do those, right, is they want to make sure that you're qualified, you have the said qualifications, right? Yes, you can say whatever you say in your interview, but then somebody from HR calls in. It could be a few minutes only. It could be a 5-minute chat. Hi, just wanted to confirm a few things. Let's chat. Do you have, a master's in whatever? Do you have, they're going to go through a couple of those bottom line, those base requirements. And here's why. Because they don't want to get burned if and when they don't do that, and then they refer you on to the hiring official who interviews you, and they come in and they're like, what, this person doesn't even have the basic requirements. So it does become, much more important, the screening interview. And like Dan said, the goal is really to demonstrate that you're qualified. And then the interview is more of that connecting, and they'll have more questions, for you as well. But it's that connecting and seeing how you might fit or not fit in their organization. So that's really good. Thank you, Dan, for that. Just a reminder, please put your questions, any of your questions, in the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can. I do want to talk for a moment about pre-recorded interviews, okay? Have any of you had a pre-recorded interview? And I guess let me back up and first, define that. So an employer, right, will say, you have 30 minutes to answer 3 questions or whatever it is, and they prompt you for over this series of these questions, and you record yourself answering the questions. Usually you're allowed at least a number of times to redo it if you want. But they more have a time limit where you have to get all 3 done in X period of time, maybe. So these can be very interesting, right? And I think you have more control over getting your answer right, or maybe polished, which is nice. You can generally do one as a whatever start, and then do it again, or even just looking at the question before you even start recording, and just think about and draft out, okay, here's how I'm going to answer this, so that you can come across as very polished and very saying what, answering it efficiently. You want to make sure to keep your answers efficient as well, but enough description to answer the question. You don't want to ramble, in other words. They definitely don't, and you can't ramble. If you have X period of time, they usually have 1 minute or 2 minutes or whatever the time period is to answer that. So you really can't ramble very well either. So you upload your answers. The difficulty that I find with this is that it can be harder to, you're recording yourself with nobody present, so you're looking at that little camera, and there's no live energy to help you kind of stay motivated, focused, really energetic. So it can sometimes be hard in that way. But a lot of times I say, my question for you would be, how many of you has anyone done a pre-recorded interview? And if so, how was the experience? Share that in the chat box. I'd love to hear if you have. They are definitely more and more common. All right. Is there anyone coming in with, let's see here. I don't see any coming in yet. That's fine. So yeah, it might be something new for you. I mean, that's not the pre-recorded interviews, while they are gaining popularity, right? And they definitely are used sometimes by some of the really large, companies and such. They're, much more common is your virtual interview, which we're focusing most of today's, talk on, right? How to excel in that virtual interview. So that's by far more common. So great. All right, so let's go ahead. We're almost through with the presentation, and then I wanted to really focus on just questions that you have. So please think of some questions that might be helpful for you to get the answer to, and we'll go through those after we finish here. So the day of your interview, it's similar to your in-person, interview, right? But when we say arrive early, it's a different context, right? You're not going to a location and, making sure that you graph it out and map it out in the future, in advance, so you can get there on time, all of that. It's more, but I still would say get to that space that's really that reserved space for you. Get there, I think, definitely probably 10 minutes early, even 15 minutes early to get to your space. But getting online, you can certainly, usually get online, maybe, 5 to 10 minutes, before, so that you can then kind of see how you're looking on camera and address any of those, issues before they even come on. That could be helpful. And great. And then controlling your nerves. This is one that I give to any person. It's whether it's virtual or in person, right? So I call it the super person pose, superwoman or superman pose, right? And it really comes down to kind of a deep breathing type of exercise. So, just stand up with your feet on the, and if you can do this right now, great. Just stand up, spread your legs out, right? Your feet out, and put your hands on your hip, kind of like we see superheroes do a lot, right? And then your chest back, your chest up and your shoulders back, excuse me. And then breathe in deeply through your nose, and then exhale through your mouth. And I'm doing it here with you. And that has been shown scientifically to increase your confidence or your perception of confidence, right? So do that before you start, right? Get yourself kind of, jazzed up. Okay, this is it. And then doing that kind of deep breathing pose. And it can really help. Now, it's not going to eliminate them generally, altogether. And, I don't know if any of you, if there are any of you who are not nervous at all when you go to an interview. I'd be very surprised if that were the case, because even people with tons of experience interviewing, that beforehand, it actually is helpful to be somewhat nervous, right? It kind of gets you on your top of your feet, top of your game. Now, too nervous is, of course, a detriment, right? That's where you might begin stumbling and forgetting and blanking out and all of those things, right? But remember as well, the person on the other side of the screen or the desk, they're human too. And so they understand that it's normal to feel nervous. So they're going to be generally somewhat forgiving, right? If you are a bit nervous, and it's, okay. If you lose your train of thought, or the question, you could say, something like, I really want to make sure that I answer this question fully. Can you please repeat the question? And that's fine. A lot of times that works, especially with those two-part questions, right? Where otherwise it's easy to forget that second half of the question. People understand that. You don't want to do it all the time, but it certainly is okay on occasion, okay? Being respectful to all. When we talk about the in-person interview, we talk about this being when you are, you're arriving and you're talking to whether it's the receptionist at the front door, or the security, or whoever it is, being extremely respectful to everyone, right? So in virtual, this is a little different, right? You're not seeing the receptionist, you're not seeing the security person, but being very professional with the person who set the interview up, with the person who follows up. If it's a different person, sometimes they'll have somebody who wasn't in the interview follow up. Being really, really very, very professional, and remembering that the receptionist is as important as the interviewer. Absolutely, because I can tell you, if they are offended, or if there's something that you do that is taken, they take offense to, you better believe they're going to say, your first interview that came in today was blah, 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 and that's not going to bode very well for you. So you definitely want to. I mean, it goes with being respectful always, right? And I think RPCVs in general are the kind of people who are respectful to all, but it's worth mentioning or reminding us of doing, okay? And then bringing your, when it's in person, you talk about bringing your portfolio, bringing copies maybe of your, of your interview, just in case some of the panelists maybe didn't bring theirs with them, right? It's very polished to be able to say, I did bring a few, extra copies of my resume if anyone needs one, things like that, you can certainly say. But when you're talking for virtual, you are talking, I would definitely encourage you to have a copy of your resume. It's kind of a cheat sheet, but don't plan on looking at it a lot. Maybe have like highlighted some of the key words, or the key job things or whatever that's going to help you, at a glance. You could certainly, you could have the resume over even if you wanted to. I'd be careful about doing this, putting it over like where you type on your screen, only because then it's so much in your face that you might have a tendency to look down. But having it beside there so that if you do need to, for whatever reason, reference something quickly or just glance, if you blank, you could have it there to do that. So those are really the things, kind of that day of being prepared for whether it's virtual or not. And let's see here. I'm just gonna go to the, I do have some tips for answering questions. This is actually from the regular interviewing. I just copied this slide because I think it's important to talk about, with your answer. These are the main I guess pieces of advice I most frequently give to our PCVs that are getting ready to interview, right? So first, I talk about prefacing your responses. And if any of you have talked to me one-on-one about interviewing, you're sure to have heard my talk on preface your responses. What I mean by that is setting the context. It sets the context or the depth of what you're going to share. So it's not a long preamble, but it may be, when I was working with Peace Corps in Ecuador, you're prefacing, so you're setting the context, and then, and your experience there. And then, and you go more into, like I said, the issue, right? There was a large percentage of malnourishment in blah, 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 right? And then I worked with my counterpart to create a, whatever you did, right? The action you took, and then, the outcome resulting in, and if you can quantify, great. Even if you can't, like somehow to, talk about the outcome. So that's kind of that standard, right? When you answer. But prefacing is really that setting the context beforehand, right? And it can also be, if they ask you a question, before you just like go into the example, it's really powerful to preface it with, something like, sure, I have 3 years of direct experience in project management. Most recently, an example from would be, and go into the example. So do you see that, where it's, sure, I have, X years of experience in that. Now, you don't always want to come out with that, but it might be, I've proven my, abilities in that area in multiple jobs, for example, and then give that, because that to them also allows them to know that context, right? And so if they don't, for whatever reason, like the answer you gave for one of the questions, they're like, oh, well, they have 3 years of experience in it. It's kind of a, I don't know, it makes it a little safer, whatever you're saying, even if they don't like that one, knowing that you have 3 years of specialized experience in, or whatever the case may be, can be very helpful to you. So preface your responses, do that for virtual, do that for, in person. In virtual and in person, you're going to get the same kinds of questions, right? So I would encourage any of you to go and listen to, the interviewing workshop, one of them that I've done. And I'm going to do a mock interview workshop on Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time, where we're going to actually talk about, like, how do you do mock interviews, and actually hopefully do some mock interviews. That's my goal, is to get people, practicing. So that's important as well. So all that to say, prefacing your responses is key. That's my number one tip, I would say. Quantifying whenever possible, right? That proves it. You can say, oh, I have excellent ability. I'm a very good writer and editor, and I've done that in a lot of different jobs, right? Like, that's not quantifying. For example, my most recent 2 years were spent as an editor for whatever it is, and going more into quantifying, right? Keep your answers somewhat succinct, not so succinct that you are not able to give any of that kind of information, but you do want to, not ramble. Again, kind of comes into comes down to that. So, or too much information, right? As I said there. So great. And then maintain really good eye contact. That is key, as I was saying earlier, with the nonverbal communication being so key and so instrumental in connection. So your goal is to, whether through a screen or in the same room with somebody, eventually, once, COVID ends and all of that, you want to be able to, connect. And that eye contact is going to be one of the best things you can do. I talk a lot about the 3 to 5 second eye clasp, because for a lot of people, doing eye contact, it can be hard, and they get really, nervous with it. You don't want to stare, because that's just uncomfortable for anyone, right? So you want to, of course, you still, blink and such, but I talk about this 3 to 5 second clasp, where you hold that eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds, and then you maybe, maybe it's a blink, a slow blink, or you glance away and you come back, right? This is one of the reasons that I love panel interviews, right? And on a virtual aspect, it doesn't really matter, because they're all there. But when you're in an in-person and you have a panel, you're going to give most eye contact, of course, to the person who asked you the question, right? That's a no-brainer. But you have the opportunity to then, quickly do an eye class with somebody else, just very quickly, like go to the other, panelists, and come back to the person that asked you the question, so that everyone feels included, right? Acknowledged. And bonus, it breaks that whole eye contact, like, I don't want to stare, I feel uncomfortable aspect. So that's my tip on that. I want to ask if there are any questions right now on any of what we've been talking about so far. Please put your questions in the chat box, and I actually have that in front of me. Good point. Yes. Dan raises, be wary of having very shifty eyes during a video interview, because it kind of makes people look dodgy when they're looking around a lot. Exactly. So that's what I mean too. You're going to give, in a virtual, there's no reason for you to be really looking around, because your eye contact is with the camera, and that's going to give good eye contact to, all of them, right? But when you're going like this and really like looking a lot, whatever, I absolutely agree, Dan. It can make you appear more kind of dodgy, or just like you're not telling the truth, I guess, is what I would say. Great. Okay, and then the comment of, someone had a pre-recorded interview for a job I applied for last year, found it really stressful. Yeah, it is. It's a kind of new concept in many ways. I imagine you mean the virtual, the pre-recorded, where you recorded your answers and submitted them, and then they considered you for further consideration. Yeah, it's a whole different kind of ball game. So absolutely. Are there any other questions that are in the queue? Please dump some additional questions on, and again, on any interviewing concept, video interviewing or in-person interviewing, difficult questions. Yeah, so whatever you might have a question on, so just put it on in here. And I think, let's see, I'm gonna go common interview questions. I thought I'd do this if we had a little bit of time. Just the ones like, tell us about yourself. That's almost always a question, right? Some variation. It might be, tell us about yourself. It might be, tell us about yourself and why you're interested in this opportunity. It could be, give us a little more background on your own career trajectory and what brings you here today, or there's lots of different ways to say it, but ultimately it's that, tell us about yourself. So that's the interview question that you should be most prepared to answer, because you're almost always going to get it, right? So the best way is to actually, I would recommend that you record yourself, but also try to do it with somebody, like live. It just helps your energy get better, and record it so that you can then go back and listen to how you sounded and what you said. And maybe you catch those things like the some of those filler words, which, to some degree is normal too. That comes with stress, but you don't want to be, too where it's intrusive. So in terms of answering the common interview questions, you don't go way back to it's certainly fine to say where you're from. I might even say I'm from the Midwest. So I might say I was born and raised in the Midwest and completed my undergraduate at the University of where I studied blah, 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 blah. Since then, and then go into Peace Corps, whatever, the other experiences, right? But you don't want to do the I was born in Minnesota and at the age of 7, my family moved to Iowa. And then, you don't need to give them that rendition, right? You want that kind of crisp one that talks about, like where you are coming from, right? And it could be more than just, physically, where you're coming from. What's your most recent experience? Are you a new grad? Are you, did you just get back from Peace Corps? I mean, those kinds of things, like talking about, stringing together a coherent answer that gives, an overview, and always include why you're interested in the job. That's a huge way, even if they didn't ask it. You could tell your story, and that's why I'm so interested in this opportunity. It seems an excellent fit for me, given my proven blah, blah, blah strengths in and 6 years of experience in whatever, right? That is gonna set you apart from the traditional candidate, right? Like telling them right there why you're a good fit is basically what you're doing there, right? So let's see here. Tell us about an accomplishment you're, extremely proud of, right? That's great. The accomplishment one. All of you have accomplishments. I know you do. And sometimes your accomplishment can be wrapped into a very difficult challenge. So it could come from the same, right? For example, the many of you who were evacuees, you were ripped out of your country of service to no fault of your own because of a global pandemic, forced to come home, try to reintegrate in a society where we couldn't even do such because we had all of the, social distancing, and people, you weren't able to even connect physically with friends, a lot of family even. Extremely stressful time, right? Like that is a huge challenge, right? And that would be a great experience to share when they ask you about a challenge you've, overcome, right? Well, and that would be a fabulous one, right? And a powerful one. Your Peace Corps service, you were serving in a country doing, what you loved and really, striving to make a difference in when, COVID hit, whatever. That's a great one. But it also could even be wrapped into an accomplishment you're most proud of, right? I am, in looking back, I'm very, after you've explained, that you were, taken out, you're here, evacuated, all of that. And I'm really proud of my ability and my proven, resiliency to just get through that. Very difficult times for everyone. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm, now doing an effective job search and looking at what's next. And, that's what brings me here today. I'm looking for an opportunity to contribute to a company that shares the same values as me, whatever, right? So that's a good one as well. So let me answer this next one, and then we'll go ahead and take some, it looks like there's some activity in the chat box, so hopefully we can get some here. Behavioral questions. Tell me about a time you used your whatever skills to address an issue in the workplace, or tell me about a time it's a behavioral question, right? So it can't be answered. Behavioral questions are ones that require more of an answer. They can't be answered just with yes or no, right? And that's for a purpose, because if they ask you questions that can be asked with a yes or no, how much does it tell them to say, no, yes, right? That, yes, it answers the question. So for some of those required, like, do you have a master's? Right, they might just ask it like that. But a lot of times you're going to get more of an opportunity with the behavioral questions to, set it up as that preface, right? That context, right? The issue or situation that was there, the action you took, and the outcome, right? The results, that can just be huge. So behavioral questions, and if you Google behavioral questions and common behavioral questions, you'll get a whole slew of them, and probably more information than you even, wanted, because those are really the questions that are most common now. So, okay. So any questions, Bethany, in the chat that I haven't seen, maybe? Let's see.
There is one question.
Yeah.
So somebody asked, I have trouble making eye contact for a long span of time due to autism spectrum disorder. Should I mention during the interview that I have this disability?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult question. I guess I would say first, when you say making contact for a long time, you have trouble. Most people have trouble making contact, right, for a long time. So are you talking 3 to 5 seconds? Are you talking, because you wouldn't want to make the eye contact uninterrupted for more than probably 5 seconds anyway, right? It's going to become very stare-y, and that's not good, right? So I guess my follow-up for you, if you can type it in to the chat box, would be how long is long, for eye contact? Because that's going to depend on how I answer this. And I guess I'll say while I'm waiting for the follow-up from this person, if it's that 3 to 5, if you can handle the 3 seconds, even 3 to 5 seconds, I would say, just as I've said, to others, that would be not considered any different. Like I think you'd be just the same as others. So I don't think you would have to mention your disability. Yeah, I think it could go either way. If it's for, even that amount, you have a hard time, like even the 3 seconds, and so it's hard to make eye contact, then you might, just trying to think of how to best
Can I have
prep
input?
them in that, to just say, I'm I do have, and I don't know if you'd have to label it either. It also depends on how comfortable you are with labeling it, and with people. I guess, my only concern is, anything that you say, right, can be, I don't want to say used against you. That's a terrible way to say it. It's like we're criminals, but it's like it shouldn't be, right? There's a lot of illegal questions that employers, they ask anyway sometimes, and so those are, the kinds of questions where, you make that decision of whether you're going to answer it, or you're going to raise the point that this is actually, not a legal question, or how you're going to answer that in a really professional way. So I mean, but people do make assumptions sometimes, right? They might make an assumption based on an irrelevant data set or experience that they've had, right, with somebody, or with whatever condition. Should they know, but it can happen, and it's probably very hard to prove that, I mean, there's the American Disabilities Act, and there's protection in a lot of ways to help mitigate this kind of, discrimination, because it is obviously not, appropriate and not legal, but it's very hard sometimes to prove that this is what it was, you know what I mean? So that's, I guess I would say that. I'm happy to, I don't see a follow-up from you in here. I would say, if you'd like to reach out to me directly, Dan or Bethany, if you could just put our careers the email, it's just careers@peacecorpsconnect.org. Oh, and good, there's lots of new messages coming in. Excellent. Okay, let's see here.
So the
Great. And
person
Dan,
did provide more context.
okay.
Um,
Oh, I see. I can look for a few seconds, but I have to switch off, look away, look at, look away. That's okay. I mean, you said you can look for a few seconds. I mean, when I talk about that eye clasp, a 3 to 5 second, 5 is getting on a longer side, right? Where you're just looking at some person without, any break. That can be, can come across as, if you're just literally looking at them and right in their eyes and no, really blinking even. I think your 2 to 3, seconds and looking away would be okay. But if you'd like to practice that with me, and I'd be happy to give you maybe some tips that might help me to see you in action. Certainly reach out to me, and I'm happy to chat with you more. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Yeah. And that's good. That's a really good perspective too, Bethany. Mentioning it, bringing it, being on the autism spectrum is a valuable part of who you are. And, that, I mean, not as a challenge, but, there's a lot of strengths that you have as somebody with being on the autism spectrum, right? There are definitely strengths with that and abilities that you can really excel in. So great, you're happy to answer any questions to it. Important to bring your authentic self. Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Bethany. Thank you for making that. Wonderful. All right. So are there any other questions that are coming in? I'm just going to the next slide here, which is really closing the interview and kind of some of the questions, to ask while you continue to put whatever questions you have about the video interview or interviewing as a whole. I'm just going to go through this. So you might, when you do all that research up front, right, you're going to develop some questions. So it's really nice to fit that into your questions at the end. Something like, I noticed in my research that your organization recently, asking a question about that or the status. That leaves them with the impression of, wow, this person like really took time to explore more and look into our organization. Not the silly question like, what does your organization do? Like, obviously that's going to be a, not a well-received one. So great. I like to ask, what is your projected timeline for making a decision, and what are the next steps in the hiring process? It's a two-part question. I like that one because it gives me an idea of, when I should expect to hear back and what the next steps are if I am chosen to go on, so I can begin preparing. Is it going to be a training that I'm going to need to prepare? Well, I can already start thinking about that, right? So I like that question personally. In your mind, what is the most successful attribute or transferable skill that, a successful candidate, brings? So, letting them tell you what the most, valuable, attribute or transferable skill is, so that you can then, when they say what that is, you don't say, oh, okay, next question. You want to come back with, well, I'm really glad to hear that, because project management is one of my really fortes, and I've demonstrated that in my past. You can close the deal, right? Cinch the deal on like, hey, I've got this attribute that you're looking for, right? And then lastly, this is my concerns question, and I'm this is the one that I'm known for, if you will. And I know a lot of you are kind of probably thinking, oh my gosh, I would never ask that. Why would I want to open up this can of worms? Well, you'd want to open up the can of worms because you want to be able to respond to whatever it is they have, whatever issue they have or concern. Many times it's a concern that really doesn't have to be a concern. Like, you have the credential or something, but you haven't been able to talk about it, to which you can then respond accordingly, right? So it might be something like, now that you've had a chance to review my resume and visit with me in person, what, if any, that's key, what, if any, concerns do you have about my candidacy? The other reason that's a really good question is it turns the tables and it puts them on the hot seat. That's a good place for them to be, because they've just been in an interview with you. You've been on the hot seat, right? They're going to be a little more like, it's like, and a lot of times they're not prepared for that kind of a question, right? So they come back with something like, nothing, you're great. Great. You've just gotten them to say you're great. So you respond and say, well, wonderful. I'm really excited to hear that, as I'm extremely interested in this opportunity and am confident I would be an excellent fit based on my I look forward to hearing regarding next steps. It's like that, right? But here's why people don't want to ask it. If they say a valid concern, if they come out with, you seem like you're, great, you seem like you're a good candidate, you have a lot of skills. I don't see as much reference to whatever software, maybe it is, Trello or, whatever. And we were hoping to find someone with Trello. You could come back and you want to first thank them always. So you say something like, thank you for your concern. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'd like to reassure you, although I do not have as extensive experience in Trello, I am very skilled in XYZ planner software, blah, blah, blah. And as a proven self-starter, I'm happy to take up the training, and I'm confident I would be up to speed in no time. Something like that, right? So you're basically telling them, hey, I might not have this, or hey, this might be a valid concern, but here's how I would go about, and I'm committed to doing so, and am a quick start, quick learn, that kind of thing. So it erases any of those questions at the end, because you don't want them in the end to leave and go, well, she was great, but I don't know if she has this skill, because then, they can't really weigh you against the other candidates fairly, right? So that's my kind of my own famous concerns question, that I always recommend people ask. Now, if if it was an absolute disaster, like the interview, and it really was bad, just, you don't have to then do the concerns necessarily. But typically we're much harder on ourselves than they are. So I almost always say, ask that concerns question. Okay, great. So wonderful, Marta, and it looks like you've used the concerns question in the past after you went to an RPCV event where Jody suggests, okay, and it does give you an opportunity to finesse any rough areas of the interview. That's exactly, you said it better than I did, actually. It allows you to finesse those maybe rough areas, or those areas in question where they just don't know maybe enough. And here's the truth of the matter. When you're doing an interview with a federal agency, they can't go off their script. They have the set questions they have to ask every candidate. The only time they can get off script is when you come back with your questions and you say, what question, then they can answer that. So that's an awesome way to get their information and insight. So great. Wonderful. And I'm looking here. I don't see any other questions off the top of, right here. Bethany, correct me if I'm wrong. But I do want to ask if either you or Dan, if there's any questions that, maybe, questions that you like either to ask, or questions you always prepare for in an interview. If we have a few minutes still. No pressure. All right.
Jody, did you talk about virtual backgrounds? I had to tune out for a minute. Or
yeah, a little bit, but thank you for bringing it up. The virtual background, you want to make sure that what you're saying, the virtual, like the one that you can put behind you, or just making sure what is behind you is
or
good.
other backgrounds. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you have, what I basically said was, have it be pretty, like a blank wall is fine, or something really kind of, muted. You don't want it to be really wild, out there, if you will. But also it will depend on your screen and your laptop and how old or new it is. And if it has a green screen, then you can add, if it does have a green screen, you can add some of those backgrounds that are, whether it's pictures or, something. But again, I'd keep it pretty muted for an interview. I guess depending on what kind of interview it is, it could be, some people want to put, pictures that show, a picture that shows the president of our organization, MPCA, Glenn, has one of his backgrounds is a picture of him in service, like what, 25 years, 30, whatever years ago. And it's awesome. Like, I love it. And for him in his role, it works really well, right? For interviewing for another position, it may or may not look as well. Do you want to add anything to that, Dan?
No, I think you nailed it. Sorry, I missed that part.
No problem. No, this was a little more, so great. Thank you so much. Well, if there aren't any other questions, this is your last chance. If there's a final question, and then we will wrap it up here. And again, I invite any of you to participate in our mock interview event that I'm going to have on Monday night. So you're welcome to come to that and prepare to practice a little bit and kind of, get feeling more comfortable. So
Jody, listen to you, this was a fantastic episode. And one thing that I just wanted to reinforce is how I've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and how important video it is, body language is during video interviews. And I would say more so than in-person interviews, where you're really being scrutinized on screen. And I find it when people really make that direct eye contact with the camera and lean forward and really try to engage. And I'm much more engaged as an interviewer, and people just come off better when they're
exactly.
doing those couple of things. Yeah. So
exactly.
Great, very important tips, and great job today.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And this recording will be available on our global reentry playlist. I don't know, Dan, can you drop in, or Bethany, the direct link? And I always want to say too, before you get off, you might want to download the chat box. Just go to the bottom of the chat and then the 3 little dots, and then just choose download. And that way you can have that. If there's any information that's been shared in there, you're welcome to have it. That's always good as well. So, but it will also be, you know, it'll show up, the links to there show up also on our Global Reentry careers page online. So at NPCA. So great. Thank you everyone for coming, and until next time, and please let me know if there are other topics that you want. We're here to serve, and I want to make sure that I'm doing topics that you are needing and wanting. So drop me a line and let me know at careers@peacecorpsconnect.org. And let us know what kinds of topics you want for podcasts and for webinars, okay? Thanks, everyone.